BOC financial update, Mr. Harris and Mr. Durkin.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, presentation today is really divided into two parts. The first third of it is really a summation of some materials presented audit and finance last week. And again, no actions requested the board today, but really just sort of getting you up to speed, caught up with where we are, events over the last couple of months. So I'll let Mr. Durkin lead that, and then the back 2/3 really I think ties into some of Mr. Miller's commentary just a few minutes ago, so we will get to that in due course. But I will let Mr. Durkin start off here with the calendar.
All right, we presented this audit and finance last week. It's something that we continually talk about as we move through this process. You know, aside from the tree there, 'tis the season, as they say. First part of our budget kickoff happened in September, October, more of an internal process with departments. November we're in right now, we are currently working through, as a result of the Act for the fiscal year 2024 year-end position. My team this week will be starting on the first round of fiscal year 2025 projections, and then we'll be coming to you, Mr. Harris and I, over the next month or so, going through where we see fiscal year 2026. So November's always a fun time for us. We're kind of juggling 3 fiscal years in that 1 month to 2 month parameter. Moving on to December, and that is when you will all set the maximum tax rate that will go into effect with part of for calendar year 2025 as for covering part of fiscal year 2026. There will be a vote on how to allocate the year-end funds for fiscal year 2024 on your December board item. And I'll go into the community contracts process in a few slides, but that will also be finishing up for applicants in December.
Yeah, and one quick clarification, that the max tax rate, we have done it as a matter of practice the last couple of years as early as December. There's nothing that ties you to that. We will be bringing you information and in briefings between now and then, and we can establish when that happens. But that's a action that will be slated for as early as December, but certainly we can accommodate that as well in January.
Yeah. Really quick, moving on to 2026 budget topics. Number one priority, as always, is I'm going to get one back later on this one.
Susan Wilson's watching us. So
All right, I'll speed up, Susan. Number one priority, as always, is fiscal stewardship, striking that right balance between the established priorities identified by the board, as well as running the organization on a day-to-day basis. Blueprint, this upcoming budget cycle for fiscal year 26 will be the first one where the strategic plan dovetails with the budget, both on the operating and CIP. So we are working through all the department budgets through that new strategic plan lens, as well as looking at performance measures. Efficiencies, we have sent memos out to department directors, encouraged, as always, it's something we do year-round, to pursue and promote innovation in their practices, timely, as I say, with the introduction of the newly adopted strategic plan. That said, 3 key topics are coming ahead that we see as part of fiscal year 2026. Compensation, you'll hear more from Ms. Martin Selby and our team on HR on that topic. Capital, both on the county and schools front, and then schools as a topic in general. We have begun to meet with you and your school board peers respectively, and Matt and I are working hand in glove with the school finance team as well as we move throughout this budget season. Really quickly, right now there is a public input period for the Housing and Urban Development Consolidated Plan. There was a recorded community meeting on October 17th that is available online for people to view. A next community meeting is scheduled for February with the exact date to be determined, but there is a public online portal that people can go and input as part of that process. So just wanted to put that out there so that people were aware and could provide their input on the consolidated plan. Coming back to the community contracts, the application period for those entities is open. It is live if you go to chesterfield.gov/budget. This year, we have synced up the timelines with the CDBG and home application processes. Typically, there was a kind of 2-month overlap between them, but now they are both open for the same period, closing on Friday, December 13th. And that's a screenshot from the budget website where people can go and apply as well.
One question.
Yes, sir.
are any of these changes from last year to this year, like sooner or later? I'm trying to get a feel for the calendar and what's transpiring.
It was on the community contracts piece?
Yeah, on any part of this, what's changed
Yeah, so I
significantly
think
from last year to this year?
The message here is simply that it's the alignment of the windows for the application, because there are a lot of agencies that consider both paths, and I think it helps streamline their decision-making and staff's receipt of that information. So it's a coordinated effort. We don't want any overlap in those programs, and I think this helps us do that. The first calendar, the first slide, I think the process, feels generally like it does every year. No major modifications. It's just sort of a good reminder for you all in the public of where we are.
Okay.
And then some other quick one-liners, an update on our long-term liabilities. Now with the fiscal year 2024 period having ended, the supplemental retirement programs, just for context, that both programs are closed to new participants, but both plans are in a good state. Just for some context, we like those funded statuses for both plans to be above 80%. For the county, that's currently 81.8%. And then for the school system, you can see they're at 97.1%, a large part due to the infusion that you all made to the school SRP program with fiscal year 2021 year-end surplus dollars.
Yeah, I think that bears repeating. So that program was in the
I agree. Thanks
in
for
the
reiterating that.
20s plus or minus, and so there's a lot of questions this time of year about how year-end funds are reinvested. You made a collective decision with the school board to invest what was a larger than normal surplus because of the COVID phenomenon. We invested it in that program, and you can see the success that it's had, and it's been a joint venture with them, almost 100% funded. It's really unheard of in terms of a long-term liability like that. In addition, that cleared out operational space, capacity space in the school budget that allowed for the two middle school projects to move forward. So I think it's probably the best example of all time of taking year-end dollars and investing them in a way that lowers ongoing cost and speeds up needed infrastructure. So just as we talk about that topic a little bit this month, but more so next month, I think that's just good backdrop.
Moving on to the second bullet for tax relief for elderly and disabled program adjustments. Typically, you would have seen on your board packet tonight an item to set a public hearing to make adjustments to that program, but you all adopted a resolution earlier this year that allows us to make automatic adjustments so that the net worth and income components of this program automatically adjust to keep in line with the Social Security cost of living adjustment. That figure for tax year 2025 is 2.5%. So both components of that program will be going up by the 2.5% to make sure that no one loses out as a result of that inflationary adjustment. There are some additional adjustments that are being made as effective of January 1. We discussed this as we went through the budget process for fiscal year 2025. You can see those listed there. One of the things I do want to point out is, we're going to talk about some financial trends. This program, the cost increase has been quite significant over the last few years. The fiscal year 2024 cost was $19.1 million. That was up from a shade over $16 million in fiscal year 2023, so quite a large jump in 1 year. For fiscal year 25, we have about $19.2 million budgeted. Based on that 19.1, I'm pretty fair to say that it will exceed that 19.2 that we have budgeted for fiscal year 2025. And then just over the last 4 years, you've made some pretty impressive adjustments to this program. The brackets have increased to 22% for both the income and net worth components of this program over the last 4 fiscal years alone. And then finally, on tonight's agenda, you will see setting a public hearing to be held in December to reallocate for the ARPA funds before the December 31st federal deadline for that program.
Hopefully it's the last time the ARPA topic is in front of you. It's no major modifications, but it's really just sort of program cleanup. Ms. Walker has been the patron saint of ARPA, and she's done a fantastic job. Probably deserves a whole 12 months of everyday excellence, to be honest with you. But we will be back in front of you in December. All those papers will be out with, a few just, again, some cleanup items, but that hopefully puts the ARPA topic to rest. Moving forward, everything will just be in motion and all those projects will be completed.
Thanks. Dr. Miller?
I know you may have this cover it this evening, but just since we're talking about it, when we're talking about net worth limit, are we taking into account the value of the home? No. Right. I didn't think so. I just wanted to make sure we clarify that for our constituents. So what we're talking about specifically is what's in the IRA, or is that what we're talking about, correct? Okay.
And
Thank
just
you.
it's the home and the surrounding 10 acres around the home to the degree it's up to 10 acres. So it's even giving some compensation deduction for that.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I have one question too, and of course, I'm sure our Commissioner of Revenue will be aware of this. I know there was an amendment on the ballot for the state to amend for widows of those and killed in action or so. Did that, I don't recall if that passed. Other news overshadowed it for me. I guess I was a little devastated on election day. But what happened with, could you speak to that amendment? Did it pass first? And then are we able to quantify what that might mean here in Chesterfield County from a budgetary standpoint?
So the amendment passed overwhelmingly with
Thank you.
over 90%
Very good.
of the vote. It's hard to quantify, but I am hopeful that we will have spouses come in so that we can provide, we can process process them for a real estate exemption.
Okay, okay. We'll need good communications relative to that, so we can probably maybe even reserve additional funding, because I heard 19.1 and the 19.2 for the coming year as well. It's something we really have to look at, given the growth in those areas, as well as veterans and seniors too. So thank you for that. So
And-
we'll appreciate your being attentive to that to assist us in that regard.
Yes, and again, to clarify, your seniors and disabled citizens real estate tax relief program, the costs have remained fairly stable, although of course they increase as home values increase at about $5 million. The growth is in the constitutional mandate, which you fund locally, because we now have about as many veterans, and I don't think anyone here believes that we shouldn't support veterans in this way. We have at least as many veterans are getting the real estate tax exemption as locally the real estate tax relief.
Thank you.
And it will continue to grow. I sign probably an average of six to 12 applications or confirmation letters a week.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Appreciate that input. Well, I would suggest as we get to this point, we do a trend analysis. I like anywhere from 3 to 4 years of this cost for supervisors. I've watched over the years, but I tend to like trend analysis so we can see where we are and what the potential might be. Thank you. Continue on, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Continue on.
Well, you like trends, you're in the right spot for the next little bit.
We're good. Good. I had
So
it there.
these slides are some work that Gerard and staff, myself put together. You all have had a lot of interest in our recent trends, so it's really just sort of trying to correct some information that's out there it's a little bit unfortunate. So we'll run through this quickly, but we'll post it on the website. I think Mr. McConnell's working on a blog to this effect. There's a lot of good information in here, but like I said, we will try to move quickly through it. So I'm going to jump around to a number of different topics, but this is looking at year-over-year nominal general fund budget growth. This is our main operating fund for the county. You all know what the general fund is. And just looking simply at the percent change year over year. One thing that's been mentioned is that, these numbers don't include school funding. It certainly does. All of our support for schools is captured in these percent changes up here. And just want to call your attention to a couple of things. We're looking at sort of the modern history as we consider it, going back to FY09, which is sort of the high watermark for the general fund budget. And you see, so over the 15 years, if you take out the 2 COVID years, when that's sort of a weird period in terms of budget behavior, at least from a percent change perspective, you've only got 1 year in that 15-year period of time that is in excess of 5% growth. And this is just, again, there's no adjustments here. This is just nominal growth. And there's been a lot of focus on that year, fiscal year 2023. And so the inset box there really kind of describes what happens there. And we will walk you through in the subsequent slides sort of some of the backstory there. But 92%, over 92% of that increase in fiscal 23 was dedicated to the installation, the implementation of the pay plans, the compression adjustments that were, decades overdue on this county side and the school side, a large influx of one-time money, quite honestly. All of that revenue that's reflected in 23 is not recurring tax dollars, but the employment of capital reserves for that year. Some tax relief enhancements, similar to what you just talked about. But that is really what's going on there. After that's digested, even in high inflation environment, the last couple of years, you see the budget growth has been sub 5% for the last 2 years. And you see the long run trend, when you take all the years into effect, is less than 2% year over year over this entire time. So I think one of the things that gets lost, unfortunately, in this conversation is, cherry picking a year or 2 or 3, as opposed to looking at the entirety of our financial history. Mr. Durkin and I would very, very much love, if every year was very simple and straightforward, and there was no external forces that took any bearing on what we did and where our financial ship sailed. But that's simply not the case. The pressures that you all face are different every single year, and we have to respond accordingly. So you really have to take the long-term view when you're looking at financial trends. Mr. Holland, you've always been a loud proponent of that, and I think you see that here today.
So you're saying we've had, over this period of time, roughly approximate 5% growth in the GL, general fund?
No. So the long-run
saying?
trend is sub 2% year over year.
Sub
Taking
2%?
effect all of
Okay.
these. You see you got 5 years there. 5 of the years actually a decline in the
Okay.
total general fund budget. 22 is a large number simply because of the large reduction we took in COVID. We didn't realizing all that, so it basically comes back the next year. It's just sort of an anomaly. It really is 23 is the only year in this entire series on your screen that is
Okay.
measurably above the trend.
Okay, very good.
A
Thanks.
simple point, yes, sir. So, going back to, what happens in 23, this is the merit history. I think it's a good tandem slide to Ms. Selby and her conversation here in a few minutes. But you see merit history coming out of the recession. 11, there's a 0 merit, average over that entire period leading up to 23, even through COVID, is just a hair over 1.5% a year. I think all of you, Mr. Holland, Mr. Carroll for different reasons, Dr. Miller for a little bit, you recognize you build up a liability in terms of the market and the distance that we found ourselves from the market. We were moving starting salary adjustments, particularly for teachers and public safety. We had a large compression problem. You cannot sustain that on an ongoing basis. This board, in partnership with the school board, said enough's enough. And in 23, we went in and corrected that. And that's why you see that spike there in 23. And that's why you see that same pattern in each one of the charts that you'll see today. But this is the underlying reason for it. It is compensation-based, particularly in our frontline positions in schools and in public safety for our first responders. So why does it have that much of an impact? Well, this is who we are. We are a people business, as public safety folks say. We still make house calls. 80% of our budget is personnel and capital. So when you have cost pressures in those areas, it affects us, tremendously.
You can see that on there. We don't like to just look at ourselves in a kind of bubble. We like to see what's going on regionally as well as nationally. And when you look at the national picture, you can also see that cost pressure being very persistent. This is wages and salaries employment cost index for all industries. And you can see for private and government on the kind of green line there's a slight lag in that wage and salary growth adjustments. But it's not a unique phenomenon to Chesterfield. It has been happening nationwide. You can see that period of low growth after the last recession, the kind of paying back that liability that Matt said had been built up over the last few years. You can see that spike. Private sector part has been coming down, but to retain talent, and you'll hear a lot more from HR on this, you have to pay people appropriately. As Dr. Casey always likes to say, don't endeavour to be the pay leader, but you certainly have to pay to attract talent to remain with the organisation.
Yeah, so if you stitch these slides together, you have a prolonged period of time, more than a decade of very low wage growth. We are 2/3 personnel cost, and then the market moves on us even amongst that in COVID. We're starting salaries for our, frontline, most, crucial positions moves. We did not have a choice in fiscal 23 but to respond, but we weren't just dealing with this particular trend. We had that decade of falling behind that we had to address as well.
So you can also see that not just on the kind of operating day-to-day, but also on the capital side. You mentioned earlier one of the topics being schools, but also schools capital in particular. You can see on the chart there's a 30% growth in the PPI, or Producer Price Index, basically the cost of building new schools, just within a short time period from when COVID had started. We are now seeing that reflected in cost estimates, for upcoming schools projects. We're also seeing it on the county side, and it's definitely going to be one of the larger topics as we move through fiscal year 2026.
Yeah, so there's a lot of conversation. Inflation numbers are out today. People pick whatever inflation measure they want. That's fine, for your own particular life. For us, we don't get a choice. This employment cost index and things like this PPI, these are the things that we actually as an organization go out and buy and invest, and it doesn't matter what's happening for, a broad range of goods. Our basket of goods as an organization are really reflected in these two particular indices, and that's what drives the bottom line at the end of the day.
But I thought it would be really good to show some specific examples of those cost pressures that we have been facing over the last few years. We're sitting here today showing you the longer term trends, but this is what's actually happening on a day-to-day basis. You can see, to keep up with the market for public safety, the implementation of the public safety pay plans. These are the recruit salaries starting when we incepted these plans in fiscal year 2022, right to what they are now. You can see that's an over 30% increase for each of those agencies. But if you also look at the kind of non-public safety part as well, you can see the cost of a new diesel school bus. Fiscal year 2021, it was $114,000, now $145,000. A ladder truck for fire was $1.5 million, is now 2.1. And the Access Mobility Program, which we've talked to you about and will also be a topic of conversation over the next few months. Fiscal year 2021, that cost was $800,000. Right now, it's sitting at about 3.1. That's a 291% adjustment over the last few fiscal years. Tax Relief Elderly Program, Mr. Holland, you mentioned trends, and we're happy to provide that data. The chart on that one, I can tell you, speaks for itself, but the numbers there also tell the same story. Fiscal year 2021, cost of that program, $10.7 million, now 19.1.
And just to be clear, the public safety starting pay numbers that are up there, we are not the pay leaders in any three of those numbers. We're within, what we think striking distance of our closest competition. So it's a big move to get to there. But I think the other thing that you mentioned, we brought everyone along with them. We could not move those numbers, what you see on the screen, $15,000, and then have them leapfrog folks that had been here serving in those ranks all those years. So that is the nature of the large increase in 23. That decompression is, basically taking 1,500 people, through that mathematical exercise. And to my earlier point, this is just up here. I mean, CPI, you saw that, you'll see it in the news today. These are the things that are in CPI. I don't pay for a lot of funerals or airline fares or college tuition, toys and recreational goods. So that's why those measures really don't apply very well to our business because it's a very wide and broad-based basket of goods, most of which does not apply to what we do here at the county. Instead, fortunately, the Bureau of Economic Analysis has a cost index that is specific for the things that state and local governments buy. And we have been trending and tying ourselves to this to measure exactly how we're doing on the cost of local government services for as long as I've been here, for the better part of 20 years. What you see here is that's charted in the blue bars, year-over-year percent change, and core CPI, which is a very popular measure of inflation, in the green. But you can see in 22 and 23, the cost of local government services up 7 and 8% for that specific bundle of goods. And you have 10 out of the 17 years plotted here where the state and local index has been higher than core CPI. So core CPI is just not a relevant measure of what we do and how we, track the cost of local government services, because it's just measuring two very, very different things at the end of the day. The other thing to consider, when you look at these long-run trends is, we've got more customers than we used to have. That's just the nature of it. This is population growth, same exact period, year-over-year percent change. It's died down a little bit the last couple of years, but still, 5 out of the last 7 years have been above that long-run average. What does that mean for us? Well, every time we add a citizen, we don't add a payroll clerk necessarily, but there are certain aspects of our operation where we have to scale to keep up with population growth. Teachers, first responders, all those things, and eventually back office scales, to some degree. But population growth has certainly driven, a portion of what we've done the last 5 to 7 years. So you've had higher than normal population growth. You've had inflation that's well above trend for us, has made for some challenging, backdrop from a financial perspective. So what happens when if you go back, this chart, our, specific index for local government inflation, all of our new friends from a customer perspective, and adjust those figures that you saw earlier, sort of our general fund, our main operating fund, deflate it for, controlling for inflation, basically, and for new customers. If you take those factors out, what is the true cost of government on a per capita basis done over that period of time? So we're controlling for, no new customers and taking inflation out of it. It's flat. You come out of 08, 09, 10, we made a lot of structural adjustments. We have held on to those changes. And for the last 13 years, bounce around a little bit here or there. You got a couple of COVID years, but it's pretty much a tabletop in terms of that 13-year period. And this, again, we have monitored and reported on this every single year. Every budget document, every budget presentation I could think of had some version of this in there. And I think this is the truest measure of the real cost of local government services in Chesterfield County. It's been suggested that, we should just follow a simple pattern, just grow the budget 3% a year, and, that is what it is. So we said, well, we'll do some math on that. That would be interesting to look at. So we went back to 2008. We're going to grow at 3% a year. That's the green line. That would take our general fund budget in this current year to $1.21 billion. Well, we're not even at $1 billion with what the actual path that we took over that time period. So we are, $213 million below, a policy that had been implemented in 2008 said grow the budget 3% a year. So those kind of simple, it sounds good. It's a useful soundbite, I guess, in some corners, but in reality, it's not something that you can actually follow. And we would be in a much different position financially. So we have been able to chart a very different course. We've had to deal with the issues that have come to us each and every year, but 3% growth over this entire period would make the general fund budget much larger than it is today. Real estate revaluations, you certainly hear a lot about that, and it's true, the last couple of years have been above trend, but as we say throughout the course of this presentation, and we'll say it through the course of the budget season, you have to look at the longer trend. Over the same time period back to 08, the average increase, people are going to be on either side of that, is sub 3% growth. You had 5 years where the values went down consecutively, and then you had a 7-8 year period where it was right on trend essentially. The last couple of years have been higher. Again, that's market conditions, and this is not taking into account all of the things that you all have done from a tax relief perspective. This is simply the market value of real property in the county. But again, if you told someone that the long run average of their for appreciation of their home is sub 3%, I think that that stands as a pretty reasonable mark. Like I said, that's the previous slide is just looking at it in a vacuum. This is looking at it from a rate perspective. You see this goes back to '04. You did have a similar run up in home values prior to the '08 recession. You see some pretty steep reductions there, but this has come down consistently. This is a 20-year period, and it's been a 17-cent rate reduction over that 20 years. So not quite a penny a year, but it's been very consistent. The last 3 years, you go back to this chart, higher than normal revaluation activity, and the rate has been reduced in each of those 3 years where it sits now at 90 cents. And this is not taking into account any of the one-time things that you all have done. We'll look at that here in another slide. Tax relief, I think this board, to your credit, you've not looked at it and said, this is the only lever that we can pull. It's certainly been a consistent one. We've reduced the rate time and time again, but we have looked at tax relief as a broad topic, and this is a great summation. We had to make some edits. We couldn't even fit everything that's been done on one single slide. But you see the rate coming from 95 to 90. We now have the lowest personal property rate of any of our peer group, anybody in the state that's in our same strata in terms of size and sophistication. We had the lowest rate there, 25-cent rate reduction last year. Cut the vehicle registration fee in half. For small businesses, we've, in partnership with Ms. Hughes, we've raised that $200,000 to $500K, and we'll look for continued adjustments in that line. PPTRA, this is one that there's nobody in the Commonwealth of Virginia that has utilized that to provide relief to citizens like Chesterfield County. You see the additions to the $41 million the state provides, $22 million, $15 million, and another $3 million last year on top of cutting the rate 25 cents. And you'll recall back in '23 when we had a year-end surplus that didn't go to some of the other topics we've discussed here today, a one-time 5% credit on the June bill, and we have said consistently that's something we will look to do when those opportunities present itself. So that was if you go back to this chart, yep, you had a double-digit increase in reval, but you also had a 5% credit on that next bill, in addition to the rate coming down for ongoing relief. So it's been a broad-based and persistent approach to dealing with some of these cost pressures that we have had facing us the last few years. Another topic sort of in this space is, there's been a lot of, you guys talk about economic development quite a bit, and, we'll continue to do so, but haven't seen that flow through into tax policy yet. And in large measure, that's true. And the reason for that is the last 5 years, Economic Development Department, in partnership with the board, has had incredible years, over $5 billion of new investment. That said, it takes you all know the Lego site. That does not happen overnight. It takes time for these projects to be constructed and to show up on the tax roll. So moving forward, it's certainly, imagine that rate chart in 5-10 years from now, you will see additional reductions as this $5 billion and all the other things that the department is currently working on begin to show up in terms of real brick and mortar on the ground. But we did a sort of a hypothetical scenario. Excuse me. Mr. McConnell has a great blog out today on this topic. Just kind of takes a look at the 70-30 ratio that you all have heard about from time to time. So what would it take to move our 80-20, rough terms, to 70-30, which in some corners is a goal. And certainly, it sounds nice, but you would have to have no new houses added, so no new residential construction at all. That goes completely halted. Reval at 2% a year, which is a full percentage point under the long-run average. Commercial growth of 5%, which is, within reason. However, it sounds that way, but that's essentially a new Lego every single year on the tax rolls. Do all of those things every year from now until 2046 to get to 70-30. Does that mean that economic development activity hasn't been success? No, no way. But this is just the law of large numbers. You can't turn, a suburban locality like Chesterfield County into 70-30 overnight. It's a very long proposition, and it will, has great promise for rate reductions as we move forward. But this is going to take, several years and commitment over several boards to get there. But I do encourage folks to go read the blog and see some more details on that.
So really quickly, as I mentioned earlier, we don't just like to look at ourselves, we also like to look at our peers and see how we stack up there. And we went back and looked through fiscal year 29 through fiscal year 2025 and the growth in the general fund budgets for those of a population of 100,000 or more. We also looked at the population increase as well. Intuitively, as the population would increase, you would expect, as Matt said earlier, the cost of services to go up. Our population is the highest in terms of growth in that period on the chart, but you can see in terms of growth of the spending, we're actually really in the middle of the pack. I think we're just slightly behind Henrico. Roughly, we're about 6.47% growth over that period. But what I will also say is within that period, we have been one of the very, very few localities of that size that have actually went towards rate reductions on multiple fronts over that exact same period. Moving on really quickly, this is something that is produced every year by the Virginia Auditor of Public Accounts. They look at local government expenses, revenues, the whole gamut. But really quickly, we just wanted to see, compared to our peers on a per capita basis, what is our revenue burden? And what you'll see on the next two charts is even with all the growth of the last few years, we are still the lowest in terms of revenue generation per capita across the larger localities in the state, both on the revenue side as well as the expense side.
Yeah, so it's factoring in that fiscal 23 number that, like I said, that's the 1 year of the 20 years that stands out. Even controlling for that lowest local revenue burden amongst our peer group in the state. And, there's 30 of these charts we'll spare you, but operating cost per capita also lowest amongst our peer group.
And then finally, one of the things we talked about this in audit and finance is we have created a financial transparency page on the county website. This actually collates all of the information that is published by all divisions within the finance and administration portfolio and puts them in kind of one easy key spot that residents can go and look. They can see all of the budgets, current year, prior years, the ACFRs that, today's just been published for fiscal year 24 as well as prior years, reports from internal audit, real estate assessment data, procurement annual report, just one nice easy spot that people can go and access all the information that we already publish.
So I know that's a lot of topics. Again, I do encourage folks to take a look at the website. It's fantastic. It's the most comprehensive resource that is out there in terms of financial resources. But it's excellent. Mr. Durkin had a whole lot to do with that. So with that, we're happy to take any questions so we can get on to HR.
Okay, any questions?
Why? Why?
No.
Any questions or comments?
Who gave that one up?
A lot of information.
Yeah.
It's